Brian, we can give her half of your pay. He laughed and leaned back in his chair. Aurora only business, nothing to him. I looked at him across his desk. The birthday present that my coworkers had signed it for me just hours before tucked in my bag. The shock must have been clear on my face because he quickly, keep going. Heather's been here for 6? You've trained her well for months now. A pharmaceutical tracking system would be going well. And to be honest, we need 2 people to do one. Heather knows how to do her job, I told her. I tried to keep my voice steady slowly. But she doesn't get the integration shows where the system is double quotes in building. Brian waved his hand. All of this was recorded in your "that's what I pay for" process guides. Thank you for, besides young talent, brings new points of view. The market is. My name is Aurora Chen, and I'm 41 years old, and up until 5 minutes ago, I was the top expert in integrating databases at Medisync Pharmaceutical Services. For 3 years, I planned and took care of the complicated method, kept track of drug trials, more than one station connecting data from study projects with regulatory submission things that pharmaceutical firms all over the country When I hired Heather 6 months ago, I was happy to see her. The system had grown to help getting more complicated, and having someone run the day-to-day business would free me up to make the changes I'd planned for months. I'd spent many hours carefully training her, going over the standard with her steps, even though there wasn't time to talk about the design behind the connecting tissue that you can't see that made everything works. I need your key card without a hitch. Keys before you leave today. Brian kept moving a severance deal around straight across the desk. 2 weeks pay secret communication clauses. I scanned the paper, the words a little less clear. Today is my birthday. I stated the claim as sounding hollow. Even to Brian was kind enough to look at me, making you feel awkward for a moment. Sorry about the time HR chose the day I signed. The deal then stood up automatically. Heather will need to call 911. Ways to make things work when they don't correctly sync? They're not in the proof. I'm sure she'll figure it out. Out, Brian answered while already looking at his call her. She's not busy. Helpful as I stacked my desk, Heather approached her face with a mix of sorrow, and that was awkward. I'm sorry, she said. I had no idea I didn't trust myself, so I nodded. To talk while I gave her my system notebook, a message showed up on my LCD screen showing database sync mistake on test client DRX 1429. Manual resolution needed. I began to describe the mistake, but Brian showed up leading me toward, he told her, Heather's got this. I smiled and told them, it's time for you to go. I said, good luck with more meaning. Being more honest than either of them could, perhaps I now know how I got to MediSync. Having worked in database design for 15 years, I set up processes for insurance firms, store companies, and finally the pharmaceutical business, where data being honest could mean exactly what a clinical study with life and death. The information had to flow smoothly. Linked to all study platforms, tools for regulatory submissions, and client screens that leave no room for error. When MedSync hired me, they were having trouble with an old method that, when I was 6 months old, I often crashed. Changed their whole architecture, building a strong basis for integration that met all of their complicated wants while staying in line with regulations. Scores on client pleasure go up really well, and the company landed 3 big deals with drug companies, mostly because of how strong their new ways to handle data management. I built solutions from the ground up. Brian Morgan took over as my boss years ago. When the last director retired, he was more familiar with Sal than technology that worried me. At first, I tried to listen with an open mind, though, always thinking about how to improve, and streamlining tasks is often asking why certain steps couldn't be. These steps for proof seemed to be sped up a bit too much, he'd say during review. Couldn't we get rid of some of the meetings? These redundancies, I'd try to explain that. The thing that looked like layoffs was actually important for finding mistakes. Architecture was where the system's strength lay. In the many places where it checks that stopped data corruption from spreading because they are connected records, Brian would nod, but you could tell he wasn't fully getting the specifics nuances, but I still thought his business view helped me with my technical knowledge. And we kept a friendly business deal when he hired Heather, who just graduated from college and has a degree in computer science, but no real world event. I didn't say anything. Teaching a younger worker seemed like a fair, and I liked sharing my. Heather was eager and quick to learn. Learn the practical steps first, though. Her temper sometimes grew with, "Are there any specifics we need to run all these questions to make sure?" Would she ask? It adds an hour to the process that takes an hour, stops weeks of I'd talk about possible disaster recovery. The system is not as strong as it looks like. I've noticed in recent weeks. Brian and Heather often spend time alone talks. I thought they were talking about her career. Growth might be plans to make her responsibilities. I even wrote down extra tools for training, hoping that she would take over a few of my habits. Chores that I didn't expect were becoming completely. After the fact, the signs were unnecessary. Brian has more and more questions about if the things I do could be turned his attention to specific keeping track of the growing exclusion from planned talks, but I had been too busy to focus on making the system better and getting my replacement to look at what was taking place the morning after my abrupt end. I woke up to a list of LinkedIn alerts that news of my exit had. It seemed to spread quickly through skilled worker circles that three old coworkers had sent messages that were shocked and asked if I was looking for fresh chances. I spent the day making changes to my resume and looking into job openings and focusing on the future instead of reflecting on the shame of being led away from the building on my birthday by evening. I had two plans made. Interviews that looked good for later in the this week. The medical data merging. The field was narrow enough that there were always skilled architects. In my phone rang right after dinner. It was Jacob, a coder from my old company. Team at MediSync Aurora. I know you could. I don't want to talk about work, but he said something in a stuck voice. The DRX 1429 event was full of stress. The database is showing errors. After the usual Sunday report, I've tried every step in your guides, but it's not working. I remembered I had seen an error message just before. Are you leaving? Did you check? Order on the additional tables. I said yes, but the systems aren't ready yet. Heather said, to just force to make peace. And that doesn't seem to be the case. Yes, I winced. Please don't do that. It could mess up the whole trial results. Set, that's what I thought, Jacob sighed. Brian was told to call you, but he didn't. Told us to take care of it internally after giving some direction. Be careful not to break the deal to keep things secret that I signed. Hang up having a strange mix of rightful praise and worry that the system I'd set up was complicated with a well-planned fail-safes and places to meet that weren't immediately clear without knowing what's really going on. Building two more calls came in that evening from a different team member describing things getting worse. It looked like Heather had actually tried to force a reset that had already been set off, causing mistakes to spread to multiple clients' databases. The team was in trouble. Now mode that tries to keep data from getting damaged from spreading. I didn't answer the fourth call, this one from Brian's number. Right before midnight the next Tuesday morning, I had an early talk with a PHA director and one of the Medics Sync's rivals that impressed the hiring manager with my portfolio and asked me why I had left my prior. Two, I just said position restructuring. They chose to make the software easier to use. The management team, he looked doubtful. It was an interesting time to hear that. There are big problems with the MediSync method. About trial info that isn't working right. I kept my face calm, and I wouldn't. I'm not with the by Wednesday. I had gotten from the company deals from both Pharma Direct and one more faux each with wages that are much higher than what I had made at MediSync. A third company asked for an interview saying that they heard good things about my building skills. At the same time, my phone kept gathering up missed calls from Brian, and I didn't return any other MediSync numbers. The severance deal didn't cover them, include any clauses that require me to offer help after the closure. And because of work ethics, I couldn't talking about their method with rivals. But when the calls kept coming in, I thought about how bad things were falling apart at my old place of work. By Thursday morning, I was too interested to stay away. I picked up Brian's call on the first ring. Aurora, he said, and his relief was clear. Voice, thank God we have a situation. So I heard. I answered, I will be in charge of the system. Is having a full breakdown after that first mistake on Monday. Everything client screens began to fall apart are showing trial records with wrong info. are not compatible with the regulatory compliances being flagged by the submission part, mistakes all over the board. I closed my eyes and thought about the A chain of mistakes is exactly what I
Designed the methods for verification too. I signed a termination agreement to stop Brian no longer agree. I'm not an worker, I think he said. We'd quickly bring you back as a tell the expert what your rate is. We only need you to fix. This was a tempting offer, but not for money, but for the pleasure of being. I was proven right. But I knew better than to quickly enter. Anything I'd need to get into the whole system and full freedom to put solutions into action. I said definitely, and Brian agreed. Right away, whatever you need, I'll think about it and get back to you. This afternoon, after I hung up the phone, I called Jacob for an amateur review of what he said about the situation, confirmed my suspicions Heather had put into action fixes for emergencies that made things worse. The problems not being able to see how each the system was linked to the others, said Aurora Jacob it was bad. Fad Dine is threatening to pull a quiet one. 30% of their deal business's income, and there's talk about legal action that could be taken if testing data has been compromised. I weighed myself in the morning. My choices, the business side of me, I wanted to save the method I had made. The person in me felt a certain happiness in Brian's. I made up my mind by noon because I was desperate, and told him, I'll help. The rate for advice is $300 an hour with at least 40 hours of work must be paid. Right away, Brian didn't even, don't wait. When can you start? I'll be there. There was an hour walk back to Meaty felt strange. Coworkers greeted me with clear relief while Brian watched with worry Heather was not there when she should have been. What's up with Heather? I asked Brian. Led me to a workstation she named in sick today. He said he wasn't going to meet my eyes. The stress of the eye used to log into the system with the admin information Brian gave us, and I began my evaluation. There was a lot of damage, but it happened after a natural pattern of what takes place when someone doesn't get the architecture, tries to make things work. Without dealing with the real problem late in the afternoon, I had stabilized the most important processes and made a plan for rest and recovery. Brian checked in, often every time more calm as progress became. He said, It's clear you're a lifesaver. I don't know what happened during one of these visits. We thought about letting you go. I kept working without replying to the comment wasn't worth it acknowledging. As I was getting ready to leave for the day, Brian came up to I have been given permission to give you this folder. He told her, get your job back. Paperwork for me with a 15% pay raise, and a more experienced I took a quick look at the offer letter. I'll think about it without touching it. After we fixed the current crisis, of course, he happily agreed to yours time, but as I got my things together, I saw an email on Brian's open laptop. It was from the on the desk next to me. CEO with the change in the subject line plan. Once the system is back to normal, the read get everything in the viewable preview text. Written down correctly this time before we do any, I got a chill when I saw the changes. Giving me my job back out of appreciation of how valuable I was, they only needed me to fix the computer and the file. Everything was done so well that at that point, even Heather could hold it. They'd throw me away again. The choice I thought I had was just another trick. The next morning I got there early, so I could keep working on my healing. The system was responding well to my corrections, and I thought there would be another 2 or 3 days before everything was fully being useful again. I worked carefully, keeping careful records of every step, not for Brian's plan for the coming transition, but for myself. Records about noon, the CEO, Victoria Snows, stopped by my workspace, Aurora. I don't understand how. We are glad that you have come back to help us get through this, she asked. Warmly, Brian says great things about your expertise. I politely nodded and went on. To type, the machine should be steady by Monday was great, and I get it. Brian has talked about your possible return to a for good position. He brought it up, I replied, maintaining my attention on the screen. Victoria's smile got a little tighter at my cold answer. Of course, we'd love to have you back on the team, maybe once this. Now that the problem is over, we could talk about the specifics over lunch, maybe, I said. Loose after she left, I took a short break outside for some fresh air. As I looked through my phone, I felt a message came from a person I didn't know. Caller ID Heather here. May I talk to you? It's important. To be polite, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop. Shop across the street for lunch break. When I got there, Heather was already there. They looked pale and tense. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat down and thought about it for a while. Whether to tell you this or that, tell me what. Heather looked around and then leaned forward. From now on, the system failure wasn't, and at least not, an accident. I felt my body go still all the way through. Brian asked me to do some things, last week, to improve the system. Making changes that would make the... He said you had verification methods in place. They agreed with the idea but were too busy to carry it out. You know, I never agreed to any of that, I said with a tight voice. Changes. That Heather later said when Monday things began to go badly. I told Brian we had to call you right away. He said no, saying it would prove your innocence. Way too complicated. And that we could fix it. She took out her phone and showed me a text message exchange with Brian from Monday morning on. His signals were clear, gave her instructions to try fixes without contacting me, even though she said more worries about the worsening situation. Issues. By the time he made up his mind to call you because I was having panic attacks, we couldn't sleep because we knew what we did to my trust in the system. What I did him. Why are you telling me this now? Heather's eyes got teary as she asked. Tear up because they're going to blame me for everything yesterday. HR called me in. They said they are looking into it. Look into violations of procedure that led to the problem with the system. Brian told them I made changes without his permission. It was easy to put the pieces together. Brian knew with terrible clarity that intentionally broke the system building I'd made was going to prove that his simplified method was, when everything fell apart, superior. I had to fix it for him, but afterward Heather would be blamed, and he would make yourself known as the boss who crises. I got a job offer from Fad Direct. Heather went on. I was going to accept it before everything happened. Now Brian says he will give me a bad word about me if I leave. He says he'll make sure I can't work there. Drug information anywhere. I felt a anger that's not just for me, but Heather was younger too. She had it all, but she didn't earn it. Played with and sent those texts to me as an excuse that made my mind race, and any other talks you have with others about the system changes. As Heather put together the proof, I became aware that I needed to make a choice. Could take my consulting fee and run. And one of my new job offers is going away me-sync to its poisonous culture. Or I could do something that could help Heather and maybe even other workers while exposing John and sabotage. The answer was clear back at MedSync. I kept up the healing work with a new sense of purpose. While my hands, I got the basic problems fixed in my mind, came up with a new kind of what I needed. As an answer, was unquestionable proof that Brian did what he did on purpose. There was proof that couldn't be thrown out as a lack of understanding or technical. Getting confused, I remembered something Jacob had said, that all changes to the system were instantly logged in to a safe server for the reasons of following the rules. The logs would show who had gave permission for the improvements and when they were put in place at a time when the office was mostly empty. When I looked for compliance server and found what I was looking for. The logs made it clear Brian had used his office time change important things without voting on them to the changes in the verification processes that went against the system directly building plans. The most damaging evidence he had was in writing. Approval was pushed back in time to make it look like for weeks these moves had been planned. Hints at my unspoken agreement. I saved the logs on a safe drive, and then I sent myself a hidden email, and here are the files. For good measure, I took pictures that showed the time. Stamps of the first improvements, compared to the dates back approvals. I had to figure out who someone else was involved, if Victoria had known about Brian's plan to do damage to the system, or was she just a part of it, taking advantage of the situation to hire me again? At first, the answer came as a surprise. When Brian's calendar message came through, showed up on his laptop while we were talking afternoon news meeting to talk about AC plan for the change with VW 4:30 evening. I need a little more time on the I told Brian about the regulation module. You go ahead with your for another hour. Meeting when he left, I left quickly. I worked on the system and then set up one. The last safety step is a hidden diagnostic tool that would let me know about any changes made without permission to the core design for sending alerts straight to my personal email. It wasn't. Basically, it's part of my consulting. I agreed, but I explained it as professional hard work at 5:15 p.m. I put my things together and got ready to leave for the weekend. The system was now 80% back to normal, with only a few small problems left that I
could fix remotely as I'd passed I heard Brian's voice in the meeting room. Going up and angry, but she's making things better. Shouldn't we wait until Monday at least? Victoria's answer was cool at first, and it's clear what will happen once she sends us the final paperwork. We thank for her consulting work and move on with the change to the simpler architecture. Heather was only a test. Run. We've already found another junior coder who can keep up with the system that is even simpler at a salary point. And if it fails again, the reason is that Aurora will have every part of the healing was written down. That's the whole point of the process. Getting her back as a eye slipped because I had heard enough. Away before they could get out of the meeting room, a strange calm was setting in over me. I now had all the proof I needed, and a weekend to make up their minds how to use. It was Sunday night, and I got a text from Brian. The system looks stable. All we need last paperwork tomorrow to close find out what your CEO wants from your consulting job to get together at 9 a.m. I just said, I'll be, in response. That's what Brian didn't know. During the weekend, I worked with a labor lawyer and a regulatory lawyer, a compliance officer at the FDA who had voiced a lot of worry about the planned modification of data from medicine trial systems. I had also agreed to take the job at PharmaDirect with a certain condition that they were happy to meet. It would be clear by Monday morning if Brian and Victoria didn't even ask any questions. I would know to ask, and I would be getting ready. I got to MediSync at 9 a.m. Monday, with a showcase with my consulting bill and a few others, carefully got ready. Records from Victoria's executive helper helped me get into the meeting room. Brian and two other guys I didn't know identify a woman in a business suit and a man with a legal pad who looks tense. We're already Aurora. Please sit down. Thanks for coming. Victoria started by practicing being warm. This is Patricia from HR, and this is Jonathan from the law team. They're here to make the end of your consulting promise. I smiled, pleased how useful. I've brought some paperwork that needs to be legal. Look over as before anyone could answer. The door to the meeting room opened again. Jacob. Heather and two guys came in after him. People in dark clothes who weren't MediSync. What does this mean for employees? Victoria asked her for a half rise. Chair? I asked a few more people to join. I said calmly to the players, Jacob and Heather know from personal experience, important to our conversation, and these men are from the FDA's Office of Compliance with Regulations. They're very interested in what happened in the past week. Brian's face lost all of its color. The FDA. This is a company inside the FDA. Matter of fact, one of the agents stopped intentional mischief with tools that handled drug trial management. The facts are right in our area of responsibility. Ms. Chen called our office with proof pointing to serious follow-up breaking the law. I opened my portfolio and sent out copies of a comprehensive report with details about the system. Designed the changes that were not approved, were cover-up, and what it means for client info integrity. On the last page, I wrote my sworn account. And, signing, this is my last will and testament. As asked, I said the paperwork. Bringing the first one over to Victoria, I've also agreed to work for PHA. Direct from tomorrow, on my first, the task is to carry out a rescue plan. For all MediSync customers who want to move their information to a more stable platform, Victoria finally calmed down. Cracked. You can't do this, for those people are under contract agreements with certain promises of performance for data. Honesty, I changed her promises. You broke the law, and my lawyer has already looked over the relevant clauses that the FDA agent started to ask tough questions about change rules for management and check steps like the interview kept going. I quietly excused myself, giving Jacob and Heather a nod for my work. This was when it was done. 6 months later, I sat in my new room in the corner at PHA for direct review. The success report every 3 months. The change for old med clients had gone surprisingly well, in part because to Heather and Jacob, who had both joined me at the new business in the field. The paper on my desk had a small something that said MediSync had been bought out by a bigger competition, experiencing important client loss of employees and regulatory problems that both Brian and Victoria had looked for other options, after the FDA is looking into data integrity. Breaking the law, my phone rang with a putting a live meeting on your calendar. Our newest drug company client used to be MediSync's biggest account. Their head of research had specifically asked me to keep an eye on their info building writing about my. A great name for system honesty. As I got ready for the call, Heather tapped on my doorframe. I was asked to tell you about the A party dinner tonight. She said, one a year since we all began. I smiled as I thought about the day I talked about it with the CEO of Fad Direct to bring I want both Jacob and Heather to join my team. Part of my job requirements was that he'd been doubtful until I told them their possible worth and their loyalty in giving proof that helped expose Medic Sync's violations. I promised I wouldn't miss it. The sound of my new email message chimed the I made a monitoring system that sent alerts me that all of their client files had finished their cycles of checking successfully the building I came up with. This was even stronger than my work at MediSync, including lessons. What I learned from that experience? Some people might look at what happened. I didn't see it that way. Others did. Was just the inevitable result of putting systems ahead of people who built them. To put short-term goals first, save money over skill and honesty. In the end, I didn't have to destroy MediSync. Their own poor eyesight had done that pretty well. Without my help, I turned in the achievement report and asked for help. We are ready to meet our new client. Getting ready to show again what it means to do things right.